They pretended to be sophisticated, and they were really just thugs. They ruled by brutality, by killing people who disagreed.
Then a DEA agent named Enrique Kiki Camarena was also kidnapped, tortured, and killed.
The Guadalajara Cartel, a notorious Mexican drug trafficking organization, left an indelible mark on the history of the global drug trade during its golden age in the 1980s and early 1990s. At the heart of this brutal tale lies the relentless pursuit of justice by an undercover DEA agent, Enrique Kiki Camarena, who paid the ultimate price for daring to investigate the cartel's operations. The outcome of this operation is the end of one of Mexico's most renowned drug cartels. This is the brutal story of the DEA agent who took down the Guadalajara Cartel. Drug cartels and criminal organizations have existed in Mexico for a long time. Unfortunately, it has become one of the primary staples of this country. For decades, cartels have wreaked havoc on Mexico, straining its diplomatic bond with the United States due to border security issues. Smuggling illegal goods into the United States from Mexico began during the Prohibition period in the 1930s. The U.S. has a very large consumer market for illegal substances. Therefore, it has become almost a ritual for criminal organizations and cartels to compete for a place in the smuggling industry. These cartels literally engage in turf wars and battles over the leadership of smuggling routes and territories, because whenever the government eliminates one cartel, another one rises to power. The roots of these organizations run deep within the criminal world. Now let's introduce the Guadalajara Cartel and its significance in the drug trade. Indeed, many people today may not be familiar with the Guadalajara Cartel, but it was once the dominant drug trafficking organization in Mexico. Its influence and legacy continue to shape the operations of many major drug cartels that exist today. You cannot speak of the Guadalajara Cartel without mentioning some of its key figures, including Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo.
He made what now is called the Guadalajara Cartel, using the roads of Guadalajara to send drugs to the United States, especially marijuana.
Out of all these people, Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo is the name you need to remember, because he was once the legendary kingpin who defined modern-day criminal organizations. Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo was born on January 8, 1946, in the countryside of Culiacán, Sinaloa. He graduated college with a degree in business, but ended up taking a career in law enforcement. Yes, Felix Gallardo was a Mexican federal agent. Imagine how different his life would have been if he remained an officer of the law, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. At one point, Felix Gallardo became a bodyguard for the governor of Sinaloa State, Leopoldo Sánchez Celis. But instead of advancing himself in law enforcement, Felix Gallardo used the opportunity to establish political connections to build his drug trafficking organization. Felix Gallardo began his involvement with drug traffickers by arranging bribes for government officials. Later, he partnered up with Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, who used to work for the Aviles criminal organization. The Aviles criminal organization was one of Mexico's first-generation drug smuggling establishments, led by Pedro Aviles Perez, a former big-time drug lord. After Aviles was eliminated in a shootout, Felix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo took over the drug trafficking routes of his organization. The three men co-founded the Guadalajara Cartel between the years of 1978 and 1980. Starting in the early 1980s, marijuana farms started appearing in desert areas. Before this, these farms were usually hidden in remote mountain areas to avoid detection, and they didn't need wells for irrigation. The marijuana they produced had inconsistent quality, lower yields, and was costly to transport. Eventually, these new farms used a better kind of marijuana called Sensimilia, which was developed in the United States. Sensimilia didn't have seeds and was more potent. These desert farms needed wells for water, but there were strict rules about digging wells in Mexico. This problem was solved by bribing officials. It was also around the early 1980s that there was a greater focus on stopping illegal drugs in Florida. which was the main place where drug traffickers sent their shipments. So Colombian cartels had to find a different shipping location for their drug trafficking, and Mexico was the next best shipment point. The Guadalajara Cartel had major connections with the Cali Cartel, one of the most powerful drug cartels in Colombia, through a man named Juan Mata Ballesteros, a former narco-trafficker. He was credited as the first person to connect Mexican cartels to Colombian cocaine traffickers. As you can see, the Guadalajara Cartel had all the aces on their side. The narco industry was booming. There was a profitable market just across the border, and they had gained a powerful ally and supplier. They had everything they needed to become one of the top drug smuggling organizations in Mexico during this time. Instead of getting paid in cash, the smugglers working for the Guadalajara Cartel got 50% of the cocaine profit they moved from Colombia. This made them extremely rich. During the time when Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Carrillo, and Rafael Quintero were running the operation, it was believed they were making around $5 billion each year. The Guadalajara Cartel had almost complete control over the illegal drug trade in Mexico during the 1980s. Felix Gallardo had established himself as a notorious kingpin, using corrupt law enforcement and government officials to get ahead. However, every drug lord has their downfall. They are either arrested or they die in some brutal shootout. Every climax has its downfall. Felix Gallardo was at the peak of his golden age when he made a fatal mistake. And that mistake had to do with someone by the name of Enrique Camarena.
Barea has helped lead the investigation into Agent Camarena's murder and says that witnesses told him El Chapo helped kidnap Camarena's Mexican pilot.
Enrique Camarena, also known as Kiki, was a Drug Enforcement Administration agent who played a significant role in bringing down the Guadalajara Cartel. Enrique Camarena Salazar was born on July 26, 1947, in Mexicali, Mexico. As a child, his family moved to Calexico, California, hoping to find the American dream. But the family encountered many difficulties after their move. Camarena spent his childhood in hardship and poverty. His parents divorced soon after their immigration. His eldest brother, Eduardo, died while serving in the Vietnam War in 1965, and his other brother, Ernesto, had significant drug issues. However, Camarena remained persistent in the face of adversity. He graduated from high school and enlisted in the Marines. He was discharged in 1970 and decided to continue his career in law enforcement. Camarena returned to Calexico and became a law enforcement officer. Slowly, he climbed the ranks and became a special agent on the Imperial County Narcotics Task Force, or ICNTF. It's quite an accomplishment for a young man who was a veteran and a uniformed officer. Enrique Camarena had come a long way, and it was all because of his hard work. By 1973, the Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, was already established, and they were looking to employ Spanish-speaking agents. Therefore, Camarena and his sister, Myrna, had the opportunity to join the agency. His sister was hired as a secretary, and Camarena was hired to become a special agent. Camarena transferred to the DEA's field office in Fresno in 1977, where he worked undercover on drug smuggling activities in the San Joaquin Valley. He was praised by his colleagues and superiors for his effortless undercover work and highly motivated approach. Camarena was a natural at being undercover, almost like an actor on stage, which is a primary required skill for a field agent. In 1980, a close friend of Camarena was transferred from Fresno to the Guadalajara office and suggested that Camarena also apply to join that office. At this point, Camarena was married and had a family with 3 kids. He desired the opportunity to work abroad for career advancement. Additionally, the Guadalajara office needed more agents due to the surge of narcotics trafficking in the city. Furthermore, Camarena believed that the move to Guadalajara would benefit his family, so he accepted the job and left the United States. It's incredible how this move would soon impact Camarena's life and the entire drug trafficking industry. Enrique Camarena began his new life in Guadalajara in the summer of 1980, a time when drug smuggling and trafficking were at their peak. It was around the same time the Guadalajara Cartel was making its rise in the narcotic market. Also, the influx of Colombian cartels' illegal cocaine imports caused a significant rise in the drug business. They quickly became the DEA's primary target. Thus, Camarena was assigned to many investigations that dealt with major marijuana plantations, which were the origin of the illegal drug trade income. As we previously mentioned, the reason why these plantations existed is due to the lack of inspection and bribery of Mexican law enforcement. Cartels would apply bribery and intimidation to law enforcement officials to keep their business thriving in plain sight. DEA agents in Mexico are not allowed to work with undercover stints, which means they can't just go James Bond and bust a national drug operation. However, they often worked with informants who could provide information on drug cultivation and illegal plantations, and Camarena excelled in this field. He was known to always have a way of getting information using his wits and charm, which was a major help for the DEA, because they don't often have informants who are willing to provide useful information about these ongoing illegal activities. There are several reasons that contribute to this issue, but the most prominent is the danger. Being an informant is a life-threatening task. If criminal organizations discover that you are the reason that led to their failed shipments or arrests, your fate would be worse than death. Another reason could be that these informants don't have any useful knowledge to provide. People who understand the industry aren't willing to talk, and those who are willing to talk usually don't have a good understanding of the industry. So yes, life as a DEA agent is difficult work. Soon, Camarena came across a person called Miguel Sanchez, and he led them to discover a new style of plantation in 1982. Miguel Sanchez happened to know the guy operating the plantation, and they told him its location, which was near the abandoned town of Vanegas in the state of San Luis Potosi, across the border from the state of Zacatecas. Not only that, they were able to get the name of the financier of this plantation, which was Juan Jose Esparragosa Moreno. Camarena worked with Miguel Sanchez to locate the plantation. After confirming the exact location of the establishment, he provided the details to Mexican authorities who raided the plantation in September 1982.
It was drug traffickers murdering these Americans. They wanted revenge after law enforcement, pressured by the DEA, torched 10,000 tons of marijuana in Mexico. It was $5 billion worth.
According to the DEA, the plantation was over 200 acres, and approximately 4,000 tons of Sinsemilla marijuana were discovered in this raid, making it one of the largest plantation discoveries in the 1980s. The Mexican authorities and the DEA hit the golden jackpot, and it was all thanks to Agent Enrique Camarena. You can only imagine it was all over the news and on the cover of every newspaper during that time. The authorities were celebrating, and the cartels were fuming. Then, the last straw that broke the camel's back was in 1984, when 450 Mexican soldiers wiped out a huge marijuana farm in Allende, Chihuahua, called Rancho Buffalo. It was reported that the authorities acted on information given by the DEA, and it was most likely Camarena who was responsible for this raid. Of course, the Guadalajara Cartel was outraged. They had lost billions of dollars to the federal authorities in the last few years, and Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was determined to find the DEA agent responsible for this damage.
But now there is new evidence that El Chapo tortured and killed 7 Americans. So why is he getting away with murder?
At this point in history, Guadalajara became a dangerous place for DEA agents and almost every American. The cartel was ruthless in their search for the person responsible for the loss of their plantation, and they began targeting any American in sight. Their murder rampage ended with the death of at least 6 innocent Americans. Unfortunately, their tragic story remained hidden until 2018, when a former Mexican federal officer, Jorge Godoy, who worked undercover for the cartel for many years, agreed to share the story of how he witnessed the torturing and killing of these Americans.
Your superiors ordered you to work for these drug lords.
Yes.
What happens if you said no?
They want to kill me.
Benjamin and Patricia Mascarenas are 2 Americans who moved to Guadalajara in early 1984 to work for a wealthy Mexican family. The 2 then invited their friends, Dennis and Rose Carlson, to visit. The couples were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they decided to spread their faith by going to each home in their community and handing out pamphlets. Unfortunately for them, they came to the wrong door and met Ernesto Carrillo, one of the founders of the Guadalajara Cartel. He believed the 4 Americans were undercover DEA agents, so he had them kidnapped, tortured, and killed. Apparently, the person who took their lives was none other than El Chapo, the famous kingpin and leader of the Sinaloa cartel.
El Chapo basically, I understand, interrogated him. He tortured him by slapping him, kicking him, whatever. But El Chapo was the one that shot him. He was the one that actually pulled the trigger.
That wasn't all. An American journalist, John Walker, was visiting his friend, Alberto Radilot, in Guadalajara, and they decided to visit a local seafood restaurant. Unbeknownst to them, the seafood restaurant was owned by the cartel. Officer Jorge Godoy was there that night, and he told the men they needed to leave. But it was too late. Rafael Quintero, the other founder of the cartel, heard their American accent and told his men to bring them into the establishment. John Walker and Alberto Radilot were never seen again after that night. These innocent Americans lost their lives due to the paranoia and suspicion of the Guadalajara Cartel leaders. They didn't care if these people were DEA agents or not. They were willing to kill the wrong people to soothe their insecurity. These people and their families never got their justice, even after El Chapo was arrested. It took the Guadalajara Cartel a few months to hone in on their actual target. On February 7, 1985, Enrique Camarena was abducted outside the U.S. consulate by cartel members with the help of a corrupt Mexican official. He was taken to a private residence owned by Rafael Caro Quintero, where Camarena was tortured and murdered. Camarena's body was discovered in a rural area outside the small town of La Angostura in the state of Michoacán on March 5, 1985. His death propelled the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration to launch the largest homicide investigation in the history of the DEA. A special unit was launched to investigate not only the nature of the crime, but potential corrupt Mexican officials that could be related to the case as well. It was also Camarena's death that escalated tensions between the United States and Mexico in the fight against drug trafficking. Investigators quickly pinpointed Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo and his 2 close associates, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo and Rafael Caro Quintero, as the main suspects in the kidnapping. Under pressure from the U.S. government, Mexican President Miguel de la Madrid swiftly arrested Carrillo and Quintero, but Felix Gallardo still had political protection. Because it was hard to send Mexican citizens to the U.S. for trial, the DEA even arrested Humberto Alvarez Machain, the doctor who was accused of extending Camarena's life during the torture. Yes, the cartel was known to preserve people's lives so they could prolong the torturing process. It is sickening. Despite strong objections from the Mexican government, Alvarez was brought to trial in Los Angeles in 1992. After the government presented its case, the judge decided there wasn't enough evidence for a guilty verdict and set Alvarez free. Later, Alvarez decided to sue the U.S. government, claiming that his arrest violated the U.S.-Mexico extradition treaty. The case eventually made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled that Alvarez would not receive any relief. It was reported that Camarena's death was associated with a few corrupt officials who had connections within the Mexican government. Therefore, they were able to cover up their crimes and destroy quite a few pieces of evidence related to the case. But that's a story on its own. The United States government was determined to seek justice for the former DEA agent, thus tearing apart the once invincible Guadalajara Cartel. The Mexican government was pressured by the U.S. to launch a 4-year manhunt for all the leaders of the Guadalajara Cartel. In April 1985, the cartel suffered a terrible blow when 2 of its founders, Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, were captured by Mexican authorities. Felix Gallardo and his family were forced into hiding. On April 8, 1989, Felix Gallardo was finally arrested. The cartel leader was sentenced to 40 years in prison. After spending 28 years in prison, a retrial in 2017 added another 37 years to his sentence. Even behind bars, Felix Gallardo continued to be one of Mexico's top drug traffickers, running his organization using a mobile phone. Following his arrest, the drug lord came up with a genius idea that forever redefined the cartel world. Felix Gallardo asked his lawyer to assemble all the top drug lords of the time at a house in the resort town of Acapulco, where he would divide his drug business and territories into smaller parts and distribute them among minor drug traffickers to avoid complete elimination by law enforcement. The drug lord gave his nephews, the Arellano Felix brothers, the Tijuana route, which later evolved into the Tijuana Cartel or Arellano Felix Cartel, one of the most well-established drug organizations in Mexico. He gave the Carrillo Fuentes family control of the Ciudad Juarez route, which later became the Juarez Cartel. The authority in the Matamoros-Tamaulipas corridor, later known as the Gulf Cartel, was left with Juan Garcia Abrego without any dispute. Lastly, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman Loera and Ismael Zambada Garcia ended up taking over the Pacific Coast operations and became the Sinaloa Cartel. So you can see why the Guadalajara Cartel was called the origin of all modern-day cartels. On September 12, 2022, it was reported that Felix Gallardo was granted house arrest and would be relocated the next day. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador made a statement regarding his transfer saying, "I don't want anyone to endure suffering, and I don't want anyone to be in prison." The downfall of the Guadalajara Cartel marked a turning point in Mexican drug trafficking, as well as the ongoing violence and challenges posed by drug cartels in Mexico. It created the modern cartel model, gave rise to other criminal organizations, forced the diversification of trafficking routes, and intensified the U.S. and Mexico's efforts in combating the drug trade. The modern cartels also provoked ongoing cartel turf wars, law enforcement corruption, and fueled addiction and crime in both the U.S. and Mexico. Basically, the rise and fall of the Guadalajara Cartel have had a profound impact on the never-ending cycle of cartel violence and corruption. As for Enrique Camarena, he posthumously received the Administrator's Award of Honor, the highest award bestowed by the organization. Enrique Camarena's hometown, Calexico, California, has honored his memory by naming a school, library, and street after him. The Enrique Camarena Junior High School in Calexico was established in 2006. Additionally, there's an Enrique Camarena Elementary School in Mission, Texas, which had its dedication ceremony in 2006. In remembrance of him, the nationwide annual Red Ribbon Week was established with the goal of educating school children and youth about the importance of avoiding drug use. In 2004, the Enrique S. Camarena Foundation was established in his memory. Camarena's wife, Mika, and son, Enrique Jr., serve on an all-volunteer board of directors alongside former DEA agents, law enforcement personnel, family and friends of the Camarenas, and others dedicated to preventing alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use, as well as violence. In 2004, the Calexico Police Department installed a memorial in honor of Camarena. This memorial is located within the department's walls, where Camarena once worked and served. Enrique Camarena's heroism and commitment to combating the drug epidemic will always be cherished by communities and his loved ones. Hopefully, one day we will succeed in completely eradicating the drug smuggling industry to achieve justice for Camarena and all the victims who have lost their lives to the criminal world. Do you believe the Guadalajara Cartel would still exist today if it weren't for the death of Enrique Camarena? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.